Good morning. I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Jefferson County Public Utility District. It is Wednesday, June 7th, 2023, 11 o'clock in the morning. And we are convened to have discussions with a couple of guests. The first order of business is ascertaining that we have a quorum of the Board of Commissioners. I am Kenneth Collins, Commissioner, District 2, and Chair of the Board.
I'm Jeff Randall, Commissioner for District 1.
Dan Tupper, Commissioner for District 3.
We indeed have a quorum. Jefferson PUD is offering both virtual and online meetings. Both virtual and in-person meetings unless advance notice is provided. Online participant audio will be muted upon entry. Please unmute at the appropriate time to speak. If you're calling in, use *6 to mute and unmute and *9 to indicate your desire to speak. The next item on our agenda is approval of the agenda itself. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Commissioner Collins, I would like to flop the order of the agenda to have the loan grant go first. We have some visitors online, and then BPA Marcus Perry is here in person. He would follow after that.
So I have no problem with that change. Anyone else have an issue with changing the agenda?
No, I'll make the motion. We accept the modified agenda.
Second the motion.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion to accept the modified agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. The agenda as modified has been approved. So Kevin, you're saying that the first thing is the Reconnect grant?
Correct. This has been brought to the commission before. Today, we have the documents ready to go. Nancy's here, Joel's here to talk a little bit about Reconnect grant loan resolution that we'll be approving today, hopefully. I do want to take just a minute to take Nancy and her team. You would think to finalize the paperwork would be the easiest part of the project, and it just the amount of emails, the amount of work going back and forth between Nancy and her group and Reconnect, RUS, the lawyers, the legal side. It's a huge task. So we do appreciate Nancy and Joel for helping out. Thank you very much. And then
happy to give some comments. Thank you for those comments. And yes, the entire district worked really hard on this. These are a bit challenging. We did it recently, as you know, with USDA, and this is for broadband. You have combined your telecom broadband system into your electric system for financing purposes. So you will see in these documents references to an electric system bond. That's because it's separated. You can internally keep your own books and try to keep them separated, but for financing purposes, they're combined. So this is a loan. The loan amount is $4,061,116 to be exact, and it matures in 24 years from when you get the money. You also, which is great, getting a grant of $9,202,232. So under Washington law, as you know, you can't just go get a loan. You actually have to issue an instrument, a revenue bond, to evidence the loan. So the resolution that you have in front of you is very similar to the resolution you just approved about a month ago for the electric system loan from USDA, as well as the initial loan you got for you acquiring your system. And one thing we want to do in these, and this has been a little challenging with the government because they're kind of rigid, but we've gotten there, is to make sure that you are able to issue debt in the future and not just through USDA, because you might not want to, or they might not be offering a loan program. So we need to be able to, reserve the right for you to go out and get a bank loan from a bank or access the public market. And you do have to get the government's approval to do that, but we built in language that, should, hopefully permit you to do that. So the resolution also approves the loan agreement. So the only action you need to do is to adopt the resolution. And then it authorizes the general manager and the finance director and the board members to sign the necessary documents and actually sign the loan agreement itself. Be happy to answer questions.
Nancy, could you just talk in layman terms to explain how a revenue bond works? And when you said the government must approve us taking on debt, who that government is?
Yes, it's the RUS, Rural Utility Services. You have that same condition in your other two debt that's outstanding. They all coincidentally happen to be with the US government and Department of Agriculture. So again, a revenue bond is debt. You are borrowing this money, the $4,061,000, and the bond just is the agreement that the government's lending you this money, and you agree to pay it back under the terms, set forth in that bond that are also in the resolution, and a lot of them are in the loan agreement. And under Washington law governing PUDs, you're authorized to issue a revenue bond. You cannot, and one thing that we had to really work through here, RUS does a lot of lending to like co-ops and other entities, and they will actually get a mortgage, a security interest on the property that they're financing. Under Washington law, you can't grant that. You can only grant a lien on your revenues. And it makes sense in the sense that, you're a public entity, a city's a public entity, and you don't want somebody tripping and falling and getting a judgment and getting City Hall, or, you miss a payment on one of these loans and somebody takes over your electric system. That's a bad public policy. So you can only pledge your revenues. And you agree in these documents that, you will raise your rates sufficient to pay your debt and your other obligations. And there's certain little, covenants that Mike et al. Will make sure you are aware of when you're setting your rates. So that's the security. They don't have an interest in property. So luckily we got somebody in the attorney's office in RUS that has been around a long time and knows that, and we were able to fit within this kind of alternative scheme. And then again, so all your bonds have a same priority. And so if you literally were short, you didn't have enough money, and you only had enough money to pay 2/3 of your debt service payment coming on, all the bondholders would get 2/3 of their payment. So that's what it's, called on a parity. And you want to be able to, these are going to be out for a long time, able to issue additional debt with that same entitlement to the money. Or else if, a bank or a bondholder has to come below all this debt, they're not going to be very anxious to lend you money, or it's going to be at a higher price. So they really want kind of the same rights as these bondholders. So we've done that.
Okay, that's super helpful. I mean, basically, it's just it's the contract by which we will repay
Correct.
borrowed
Exactly.
money, and it
Yeah.
specifies how it's secured. You can't take an interest in the PUD, but it's committing us to repay it. And it's talking about if there was a shortage, how they and all the rest of those lenders would be treated. They'd be treated equally. So that's super helpful. Thank you for
Yep.
that.
You
And then
got
I
it.
think you touched on the interest rate on the loan.
So it's a treasury rate based on when you draw it. But it's set when you draw it.
Okay. Just based on what the treasury rate is plus
Yes.
whatever. Okay, thank you.
So Nancy, as Commissioner Tupper, along that same line then, could you explain a little more about the parity and the pledged accounts, how we will be working to take care of those accounts, how that works, how we get the money, how we disperse the money, how it has to be held or, disperse, that sort of thing? Could you go on that a little bit?
Yes, I mean, this is a big job for your treasury people, so hats off to them because it's not easy. With the federal government, typically if you just are going to get a bank loan or go even, to the market, go to New York and get a banker to lend you money, that money's just yours. And, you promise to spend it for the projects, for capital purposes, but it's yours. You have to track it. In this case, the government, when they give you these grant and loan proceeds, they really want to track it. They want to make sure you're just using it for these projects. And if there was some left over, they get it back. And then, those funds accounts are subject to federal audit, but not, they're not going to audit your whole, all your accounts, but they're going to make sure that you really document that you spent the money, what you did with it. And in this case, I know in the other one, you got the proceeds. You will get the proceeds very soon and you can get them all at once. I don't know if the agreement here, if it has to be a drawdown as you need it, basically to spend your bill. I don't know if somebody knows that.
I think that's not here. Drawdown is what they're saying.
Okay. Yes. So you'll which makes it a little easier in some ways, because obviously you're not going to have left over. You're going to draw down when you get bills to pay. And then, so that in a lot of ways is easier.
Well, if we do that, then does the interest rate fluctuate depending on the time that we actually draw the money out?
Correct. It's set for that amount when you draw the money.
Okay.
And then it's fixed. So it doesn't keep fluctuating. For the 24 years. Once you draw it, the rate.
I'm confused.
It's fixed at that point. The rate, once you take a draw, the actual rate is fixed for the life of the loan for 20.
Okay, all right, so
Right now, you don't know what it's going to be because you haven't drawn it,
got it. What I'm asking is, if we draw it down gradually as needed, it's the same interest rate? No.
No, it's when you draw it. So that's a bother.
Yeah, so we could have various tranches of money at different interest rates, and I understand that for that particular sum of dollars, we have a fixed interest rate for the entire length of the loan, but we could be dealing with a variety of different interest rates because
Correct.
we're not necessarily going to take all the money at once.
Correct. And then once you've drawn it, then, the government will give you a schedule. So you will know what your, payments are at that point.
So maybe more of a staff question. And so for sake of clarity here, because we're getting the grant and we have the loan, there's also the Washington State Broadband Match. And we're talking about a certain project package here for all these funds. what happens if the state broadband office changes the amount to a lesser amount than what we're expecting? How will that affect our ability to repay the loan or generate revenues or whatever the question be? And how will it affect the windows we have to do the work that we're proposing with this money in the time that the grants allow?
So the state won't be changing the amount after the documents are signed. We'll actually put in for the cash match for the state, and then they should issue that within the week or so. So we'll have first, that has to be spent first. And then once that's exhausted, then we do the loan funds. After the loan funds are exhausted, then we get the USDA grant.
Because again, this is a staff question, getting maybe off point a little bit. But because we are tying this to the electric division in these contracts, if broadband doesn't generate enough revenue, I want to be clear, we will be taking revenue from the electric side to cover this debt service. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Yes, that's accurate. Very similar to like when the electric took over, the water division guaranteed the monies until electric got it.
So in that scenario, would those monies be repaid to the electric side from the broadband division at some point? How would we do that? How would that be set up? As a loan from the electric, or
So
I'm
they're
curious.
the Same division, what will happen is Michael will have account one was electric, account two is the broadband, so the commissioners can see. It won't be set up for actually as a loan per se, but the monies paid in and out will be viewed as for the commissioners to see.
I mean, ultimately, it becomes our policy.
It does.
Yeah, so how we want our staff to account for the lines of business. And like when I brought up Benton PUD the other day, Chris Folta, and the way they look at their broadband division is it's really an internal accounting, but their commissioners really want to know how that business line does. And what they do is they do a 5-year projection and a 5-year look back on how that division is doing and how they charge their rates and to have as much transparency from where the money's coming from. So it's really up to us.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the reasons why I brought this up is because we had some discussion last night, and that's about rate impacts and rate pressures to the broadband in particular. You know, that's what I think the public needs to understand, how this is going to work, how it's going to play out, where the revenues are going to come from, and it's going to be through rates and fees. So everybody should be aware that this is going to be a moving target as we go along. So.
Even though it seems like a magic money tree that's bringing money in, ultimately there is no magic money tree. We have to pay for things ourselves. Great. Well, I don't have any other questions, Ken.
So are we ready to act on the resolution?
I'm ready. I've got the resolution in front of me. So our attorney has provided us a copy of the resolution, and I'll just read it. I move that we adopt a resolution authorizing the issuance of an electric system revenue bond in the principal amount of not to exceed $4,061,116 to provide funds to finance a portion of the construction of a broadband infrastructure project of the district, authorizing the sale of the bond to the United States Department of Agriculture, Rural Utilities System, fixing and approving the terms and covenants of the bond, approving a grant for the project, and providing for other matters properly related thereto.
And I'll second that.
And I just have a quick question for Joel. So there's always questions about procedures. So this is a special meeting, but because we've advertised it with this item on here, we can take action today.
Yes, it was properly noted on the agenda, and we're all good, proper form. So when I think it's Commissioner Tupper is the secretary, can note that this was a properly held meeting, properly noticed under state law.
Okay, thank you.
You have a resolution number?
We don't have one yet.
Okay.
We will,
That's
we'll
fine.
get that.
Well,
It's 2023-015.
we typically on the agenda because sometimes
2023-01.
5.
5.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
we wait till we approve them because sometimes we take them out of order and it gets confusing.
Good idea.
But we only have one today, so low risk.
Further discussion on the resolution? Hearing and seeing none, we are ready to vote. I won't ask you to read the resolution again. So all in favor of the resolution as read previously by Commissioner Randall, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. The resolution has been approved.
Fantastic.
Thanks so much for, again, there is no such thing as free money. You know, Will and Mike and Kevin and Nancy and Joel, thank you for all the work you're doing. It makes a big difference to the citizens of Jefferson County, the amount of money that we've been able to leverage to bring here, and it'll take years to prove out how it's going to work. But I really appreciate all the work you've been doing and the responsibility you've taken on, and the learning curve and probably the frustrations involved in this.
My pleasure.
Nancy, thank you. If I,
Okay.
Commissioner Collins, if I could just take one personal moment here and thank Nancy and her team, because from my perspective, this doesn't happen in the really record time that it did, although it doesn't seem that way, but it was. Without Nancy and Stacy and her team, and they just have taken care of us. And
you.
just can't thank you enough. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Nice to have you in our corner.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Come
I would add to what's been said. Thank you so much, Nancy and Joel. And Will and other people who've contributed, because this is a huge step. It is very forward-looking, and to my knowledge, there is no other PUD that has been that successful in being able to obtain funding for making a huge step in providing broadband across Jefferson County.
I'd like to thank the legal team and all the staff as well for trying their best to expedite this and also to make it as transparent to the public and to the board as we can get it. So thank you.
So that being said, I think we're ready to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the presentation. Well, it's a BPA update with Marcus Perry. Kevin, do you want to provide a further introduction?
So I would really like to thank Marcus here. You know, I go to some meetings and we're very fortunate with our BPA account representatives. It's been, you know, they're very good about coming down, spending time with management. We just have a very good relationship, and a lot of that credit goes to Marcus. He's very willing to come down and help. We reached out to Marcus based on a request a couple board meetings ago on high water mark and a few things that's going on with BPA. So Marcus came down, he's here in person. We're hoping this becomes really a question and answers with the board, and Marcus has some information, but it is a design for commissioners to ask questions and see where we are and how things are going to move forward. So thank you, Marcus. Take it away.
Thanks, Kevin. I always like coming out here. It's a lot different weather than the last time when you guys had your so I was very happy to see that. But yeah, thanks. So the topics I had teed up, and I very much will allow the conversation to go where it needs to go, was the kind of above high water mark positioning as well. That was one topic, and the other topic was kind of provider of choice, which is our next contract discussions. So I have materials there. I am not going to go through this whole packet. I kind of cobbled this together from introductory material. Really, the first 6 slides is all I'm going to focus on, and even that I'm going to try and breeze through. Which again, as I'm discussing, I you know, you guys pick on something and we can go down that hole, or we can move me along as needed. So, oh yeah, I I think I have one more. if you need. Oh, okay.
Put it up on the screen.
Oh, that's a good idea. Sorry about that. So what I'm starting with is tiered rate methodology. This is the current rate structure which Bonneville's contracts operate under. At the time in 2009, 10, this was new. This was new. This idea of a tiering rate structure. Prior to that, we just had melded rates, which is, or you may hear it referred to as buy and meld, which essentially is if customers have growth, Bonneville goes out, acquires resources, and we spread those resource costs across everybody. And so that was the old rate structure, but during negotiations for the current contract, customers wanted something a little different. You had customers that were growing and customers that were not growing, and there was some I guess strain on that relationship. And why am I paying for load growth for another utility if I'm flat or declining load? Why should I pay the cost of these other utilities that are growing just for whatever reason? And so that led to this regional dialogue, which is ended up being what the contracts were called, and this idea of, okay, well, let's take the system and kind of make that the first tier, the tier 1 system, the federal based system, and any load growth above that, each utility is responsible for that service and paying those costs accordingly. And that was really the genesis of what the tiered rate methodology kind of came to, this notion of a high water mark. Say that will be the demarcation line. And again, that line is based on the projected output of the federal system. Say we only have this much power for our preference customers. Say, okay, this is all we can allocate. Anything above that, customers you're on your own for serving that load.
And Marcus, again, you said that was around 2009.
Well, it was probably in 2000. The contracts were signed in 2008, so probably 2005 frame.
2000. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the way it's talked about, it's almost like it's some sort of Bible or holy, what do they call the 10 Commandments or something, that it's been forever. And it's really interesting to hear that it's a pretty recent evolution of EPA policy and rate structure of what we have now. So
Very, very much so. I mean, in terms of, tiered rates was non-existent before this contract, and that contract started in 2008. So it's not that
Easy to
long.
confuse because that was now's the provider of choice is the new talks and new contracts that are being worked on. And it was the regional dialogue that was the old one. So people tend to kind of lose track sometimes of which one's being talked about. So there is that demarcation between those two terms being the old contract versus the new contract.
Correct. So we try to label them, right? Regional dialogue is one contract. The next one the provider of choice seems to be the nomenclature that's being carried forward. And prior to regional dialogue, they were called subscription contracts. So each of them kind of have a name. Anyway, but the tiered rate methodology was entirely new with the regional dialogue. And so that's the world we're living in right now.
okay.
That slide 3, I guess, is really just the math behind how we determine the high water mark. You have this contract high water mark, which was basically a snapshot in time for every customer. We said in 2010, we said, what is your load in 2010? We'll make some adjustments for conservation and some, 2008, 2009 was the recession. So there was some load economic adjustment that was made too. But basically it was, okay, what's your load in 2010? We'll say, okay, that's how much your tier 1 is. You get that much tier 1. As your load grows under this regional dialogue contract, you're going to move out of that tier 1 and you're going to be in above high water mark load, or tier 2 is another way to phrase it. But that was the notion, contract high water mark. We determined that in 2010, and that was set for the contract period. Now, obviously you guys weren't a utility in 2010, but we used data from Puget that we could cobble together, and we're able to come up with a reasonable estimate of what the load for Jefferson.
So on that contract high watermark, when you're a tier 1 preference customer like us, who all of our power comes from Bonneville, what happens when, for the public's knowledge, what happens when you exceed that high watermark? Then what happens to our tiered rate?
So that rate, that tier 1 stays, that rate is locked in for a rate period. If you have load above that becomes Jefferson or any utility's responsibility. And, I have a couple slides to talk about that, but there's a few ways you can serve that. You can either bring on a non-federal resource, meaning you can go out and acquire a wind plant or so whatever you want, and you can bring that to serve that above high watermark amount. You can have Bonneville do it, which is again what we call tier 2 products. And there's a few different products under that umbrella. You can do a combination of the two, but that's really it. It's on the utility to oh, perfect. On slide next 3. Might even go one more.
That's impressive, guys, by the way, just on the fly, getting that up there.
That is,
You go to a
yeah.
conference, some attorney brings his materials in. They're not going to get it this fast. You guys are,
Picking on the attorneys. it's
they're
not all-
start. Oh, no, it's usually.
That's
the attorney.
fantastic.
He's
That's helpful.
picking on him, but he's accurate.
They can't find the mouse either to move the PowerPoint.
Exactly. So here, this is what answer your question. How do we serve above high water mark? Anything above that tier 1 allocation is non-federal, purchase from BPA at a tier 2 rate, combo of the two. And that fourth one is more of a default. If you don't have above high water mark load greater than 1 average megawatt, then it's just served at load shaping, because we realize customers, if you're going out to acquire a resource, they don't usually sell them in half megawatt increment. They want whole megawatts. And so to make that easier, we go, okay, well, 1 average megawatt, if you're in that buffer zone, then that's kind of, we'll just serve it at load shaping. So you don't have to go out and try and acquire a resource or purchase a tier 2 product, because those fractional increments are just very hard to find, and nobody really wants to trade on that.
So just to understand it though, let's say we hadn't, or we don't go out and acquire other resources other than BPA. We continue to ask BPA to fully cover our loads. Isn't it that we literally have like a BPA meter at the first substation? So it's keeping track of our loads, and it's almost like a utility customer. If once you go over a certain amount, you're keeping track of that. And then if, as you say, if it's over a megawatt, then you're charging us for tier 2 for that amount above the high water mark. Is that
It's
the correct description?
Conceptually, yes, but in real, we don't do it in real time like that. We
Okay.
don't have, it's not metered, you went over, it's on a forecast basis. So prior to a 2-year rate period, you will know if you have above high watermark load. Because, if you're trying to acquire a resource and I only need it on Wednesday and Friday, no, that's not going to happen. You need time to go out and purchase that. So
Okay.
it's a 2-year look. And so in advance whether or not you have above high watermark load, and you'll have to tell us in advance how you're going to serve it
Okay.
via any of these options here.
And Marcus, this is Joel. Can you tell us what the current status of JPUD's load is? Are we having to cover above high water mark, or where are we?
Definitely. If you go to the slide 6, this is all these text slides. This is really the picture right here. This tells the story. What those bars represent are the total retail load, your load that was anticipated going into those rate periods. So every 2 years is a rate period for Bonneville. So 14, 15, so you can kind of lump them together. I put in green the current rate period, FY 22-23, because that's what the rate period we're currently in. That black bar, or the black line, excuse me, that you see, that is your rate period high watermark. When I touched on in the beginning, you have your contract high watermark, which is set for the contract. But every 2 years, we adjust that based on what the projected output of the federal system might be, because we knew it wasn't static. So every 2 years, you get a rate period high watermark adjustment, and it could go up or down depending on what we project the output of the federal system. If CGS has an outage, we know we're going to have less Columbia Generating Station, which is the nuclear plant. If that goes down for maintenance, that we know you're going to have less output of the federal system. If we do efficiency improvements on some of the turbines at the dams, then we might get more. So we just know every 2 years we wanted an ability to adjust based on the projected output.
Okay.
So that black line represents the rate period high watermark that Jefferson has faced since you guys have been a utility. So every 2 years, there's a new sort of plateau line, if you will. So anytime you're below that black line, that's essentially headroom. You're below your high watermark, you have headroom. In those early years, 14, 15, 16, even 17, you had some headroom. The high watermark kind of continued to drop the tier 1 system a little bit. So in 18 and 19, you'll see you guys actually crested above the high watermark. Now that dotted line, that's that 1 average megawatt zone. So you never actually breach the 1 average megawatt above your high water mark. So essentially, everything in that zone is served at load shaping, which is still a tier 1 type of product. So you really haven't hit tier 2 or above high water mark load above 1 average megawatt until FY 22-23, which, Joel, to answer your question, that's the current rate period. The current situation you're facing, that bar, the blue bar, is your load. And it's not only above the black line, it's above that dash line. So you are over 1 average megawatt above your rate period high water mark, which means everything above the black line is essentially tier 2 for you guys.
And for some clarity, Marcus, on the tier 2, that is market power and that fluctuates. So we could pay less conceivably on tier 2, depending on when we hit it, or you can pay more than what your tier 1 price is.
Very much so. Short-term rate, which is the tier 2 rate that you guys elected, is determined every 2 years. So if the market is low, which it has been prior to the now, the tier 2 rate was around $35-36, which is about what PF Power is. So
Okay.
it's been, pretty on par.
Okay.
That's changing. BP 24, which is FY 24-25, the upcoming rate case, the tier 2 rate from our initial proposal is more like $67 megawatt hour. So more than double for the tier 2 rate. So PF rate is that 35 range, but tier 2, like you were saying, is it's a market purchase. So it can fluctuate with the market. And it's definitely been elevated prices right now. So the FY 22-23 period, which you're currently under, the tier 2 rate is more in that 35-36 range right now, which you guys are paying. But you can see in 24 and 25, the black line shot up. And so I couldn't recall the exact reason why the dip happened in 22-23, but the tier 1 system output is definitely higher, to the point where you're actually slightly below in both those years your 1 average megawatt buffer zone. So you technically don't have above high watermark load. We've already forecasted that, so you will not have tier 2 obligation. You won't be paying this.
Marcus, could you make these slides available to us? There's a lot of information here and not entirely easily digestible.
Yeah, if you don't live and breathe this, I get it. Definitely. I can, like I said, I've cobbled some presentations, so most of the stuff I've used before. I'd be happy to leave it behind.
Thank you.
This out.
Let me review. Well, I think so, but let me just review it before I give, because I might have to chop this down. Most of this stuff is good, but there's a couple in the appendix that I might not be able to share. So 24-25, I know that the final proposal rates will be out in July of this year. So those are kind of certain. Those were the loads that were used. 26, 27, 28, those are dash bars. Those are forecast. So that's where we're anticipating Jefferson's load to be. We will have annual updates, so those numbers could change, but I just wanted to give you the full picture of regional dialogue, which ends in 2028. But yeah, so current rate period in the green, you guys do have tier 2 obligation. Next rate period, you do not. So, but you're really close. And assuming the black line, the rate period high watermark stays the same in those out years, then you'll likely have above high watermark load in tier 2. Which again, you'll have options. You can bring resources on or let Bonneville serve it at the short-term rate.
And
That's helpful, and it is so complicated, but it's really helpful also to understand how you use that 2-year rate setting cycle, that it's not just setting BPA rates, it's setting that high water mark for that period of time. I didn't realize that. That's new information for me. And it's been interesting to see these different dialogues, because realizing that BPA gets kind of pulled in different directions by different utilities based on their situation. And there are utilities, I don't know if you can characterize like the percentage of them that truly are flat, not growing, or have lost load because the way they negotiate and what they want is diametrically different than utilities that are growing. And I can see how it puts Bonneville in a tough situation.
Yeah, definitely. It is tough. I don't have a percentage of flat declining load. But yeah, so I don't know if I could go there, but yeah, it is a tough spot. And I thank you for acknowledging that, because we do hear both sides, right? The
Mhm.
growing utilities want to preserve as much tier one as possible, or even the flat declining, they don't want to lose anything, right? So they don't
Right.
want to give up any headroom and give it to somebody who's not growing. And those sorts of debates have kind of taken place within the next provider of choice conversations we've had to date. And so, yeah, it is Bonneville tries to, deliver on equity as best we can in those scenarios. We know not everybody's going to be happy with both sides, I guess, with 100% happy on what we come up with, I imagine. But, we do take into account, what we hear from customers, and we try to be diligent and disciplined to make sure we're meeting our obligations as a federal entity. We got to recover our costs, and we don't want to put undue harm on any one utility, but we have 130-ish customers. So it's a lot of different opinions and
As part of that discussion during the provider of choice now, it's, you can't lump everything together because geography matters, and the municipals are growing where maybe more of the rural are staying flat, or just depends on the business opportunities in those areas. But maybe you could touch on, and maybe you do in here, and that's the conservation incentives and how that can affect your load or your headroom and that sort of thing.
you're talking about for the next
For the next contract, yes.
So when I was talking about the derivation of the contract high water mark, which again, is the sort of the allocation of amount that the up to amount, I guess, that a customer can take of tier one power. We look at the load at a point in time, and then we look at, oh, well, this load or utility did a lot of conservation. Their load would have been big. They would have had more high water mark or more load had they not done this. And so we want to acknowledge that. Correct. Had you not done conservation, your load would have been higher. And so your high water mark is a little bit lower because, or, the first, initial run is a little bit lower because you did all this conservation. So we don't want to harm customers. So we do encourage conservation. So we said, okay, well, you get a little bump up if you did some self-funding conservation. You get a little more high water mark, because we think that's a good thing. Conservation is good. And so it is acknowledged there. And the other adjustment that we made under regional dialogue was something called provisional load, which again was 2008, 2009 was a recession. Customers were saying, hey, if you're picking 2010 as the year, I just had a bunch of businesses go belly up. My load is way down. That's not fair. I'm not going to start this contract. I'm going to have a low high water mark and it'll be immediately into tier two. And so we said, okay, we took an average of 2005 through 7 and said, okay, what was the average of your load? And we compared it to 2010 and we said, okay, you get this much provisional. If that load comes back by 2014, we'll let you keep it. If it doesn't, you get ratcheted back to where we saw it. So we did things like that. And those, not the exact same things, but similar things might be on.
And I don't know if you can talk about it yet or not. You talked about that base year using whatever it is to determine these contracts. 2026, is that still the targeted date, or is that something you can or cannot talk about yet?
So I can't talk about let's move on to the next stuff. But the proposed year that we had been out, in these workshops talking about was 2023 was the year that we were looking at, because we didn't want folks to be able to, if we picked a future year, you could stop doing conservation if you wanted to get, there's things you could do. We wanted to limit, not saying utilities would try to game it, but just there's things that you could do, decisions you could make that you may have not made had you not known it was going to be a future year. So if we pick a year that's currently, people have less flexibility to kind of make changes like that. That was the proposals. And to your point, I can't comment on what the draft final looks like. That will be out in July of, in a month. But if I move more towards that direction, that draft policy paper out in July is a reflection of the last almost 2 years of conversations we've had with customers and groups and things like that. What started as in I think it was like 17 or 18, we initially went out with a little survey. Hey, what do you like about regional dialogue? What don't you like? Trying to get that feedback. And then it prompted, like I said, 1.5 years of workshops where we could dig into certain components of what the next contract might look like. And we just wrapped those up in May with a little road show where we went out to different areas, Montana, Idaho, a couple in Washington and Oregon. And kind of presented kind of where we started and where we kind of landed in the conversations. And then we kind of, right now, we're in this, like, I don't want to say dark period, but we're in this period of writing. Now we got to write the policy. And we got to get decisions from John Hairston and other senior executives. So, okay, this is the policy direction. It's not the contract, it's just the policy direction. And so that will be available in July. There will be a comment period. And then we'll respond to comments, you know, the whole public process. And so we should have the final out, or hoping to have the final out in January. And that will start the next phase, which is the actual contract writing and the you know, product development, you know, those more of the detailed pieces of the how do we move this policy into writing. And then after that contract's done, which we're hoping for 2025 and hoping to get signatures. If we sign it in 2025, it really isn't effective till 2028, right? Because that's when the current contract expires. But that will give us 2-3 years of implementation. So if we need to change out systems, we need to prepare ourselves for that new contract. It gives us some time. And it's the exact same process we follow with regional dialogue. There was a contracts were signed in 2009. They weren't effective till 2012. So it gave us a period to do a first rate period and
And
things.
it
like
also
that.
gives the utilities a chance then to start planning investments they want to make or conservation moves they want to make. That things are kind of set at that point. That's why there's the lag.
Exactly. That's the idea, is to give some space, because even that customers are like, I need to know even before that. So we're actually, if things go as proposed, 2026 will be when we actually do the crunch all the numbers and say, this is everybody's high water mark for 2028. So you'll know, you know, 4+ years in advance how to move, you know, well, I guess you'll kind of know sooner than
Kind of
that.
plan for the future.
Plan how to plan. If you want to do resource development, you know, we don't want to be a barrier by any stretch to that sort of effort. So.
Could you, and just to clarify the comment you made about if you've done self-funded conservation, the proposal will probably is going to allow a little bit of a bump. We haven't done that. The conservation we've done has all been
In-house.
it's been through BPA and rates that we pay through BPA. We haven't charged our customers additional money to fund our own conservation program, correct?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We
that's
have
what's
it.
reported. Okay.
So, but then you just mentioned, if you want to give us a little look ahead in case we want to develop our own resources. So that brings up this topic of, and if you could say what that rule is, but right now there's a rule that if we develop our own resources and it's above a certain amount, then the tier 1 is lowered by that same amount. Could you just touch on that rule? And could you touch on to what extent there's discussions about possibly modifying that rule? Because I look at that rule as it doesn't encourage, you know, from the perspective, if tier 1 is seen as a valuable commodity, it doesn't encourage us to develop new resources because we don't want to lose tier 1.
Yeah.
Or if I could add to that, just tag onto Jeff's comment, that it also doesn't acknowledge that Washington State utilities have certain obligations under legislation that other customers of BPA may not have. So, you know, we're sort of pressed on that as well.
Mhm.
So I'll just start with the provider of choice, at least how the discussions have been. There was very much a lot of customers commenting that there should be an acknowledgement of, if I have brought on a new resource, I should get a little bit more high water mark for that too, because essentially at conservation, Bonneville didn't have to serve that load. I had to serve it. So you're going to, you know, you don't want to, you know, take them back too far on their high water mark.
Is that the single large load? What's that rule called? Is it the single large load
It's-
rule or?
No,
new
it's
generation?
that's a new proposal. There was no rule. That's what I'm trying to understand. What you say, there's a rule that we had.
It's if you generate more than 1 megawatt,
If you bring
your own
new energy online that's more than 1 megawatt, BPA, my understanding is, would lower our tier, our high water mark by 1 megawatt. It would take that power away.
In the next contract.
And is it the next
Is that what
two?
you're-
What is it talking
So
about?
if we put in a hydro plant and we generate above a 1 megawatt, there's rules that BPA has in place that it doesn't pay us to put the 1 megawatt in, it pays it becomes a wash with what the cost of the BPA power is and all that kind of stuff. Similar to what we're looking at on the,
But isn't it very specific, Kevin? Don't for if it's over a megawatt, let's say 3 megawatts, we put in a 3 megawatt hydro project on the city water line, which is what we're actually looking at feasibility of. Under the current rules, BPA would then lower, if we didn't have a new load that was identified with, we were just meeting existing load, BPA say, oh, well, you obviously don't need that 3 megawatts of tier 1. So we're going to lower your tier 1. That's our understanding of.
So
rules.
yeah, I can see how when regional dialogue was sort of conceived, it was, we were cutting everybody at the high water mark. We assumed load would just grow,
Mhm.
right? And that really didn't happen. And so we assume customers are only going to bring resources on if they have load growth. Why else would you bring a resource on?
Mhm.
So it wasn't really envisioned that you would be offsetting your tier 1 load. Why would you want to do that?
Mhm.
So but customers said, whether it's community solar, other things they wanted to bring on resources, even if they didn't have above high water mark load. And so, like I said, the contract when it was conceived didn't really why would you want to not get cost-based power? Why would you want to replace it? So that's kind of the strain we're getting now when loads really didn't grow as much as we thought, and customers still want to bring these resources on. And so per the contract, it says you could really only bring on resources to serve above high water mark load, because that's the way we had thought. We did carve out some exceptions for small resources and said, okay, if you have above high water mark load and you don't have above high water mark load and you still want to bring this on and it's less than 1 megawatt, we have what we call a SNEER, which was a small non-dispatchable, as long as it met the criteria, we said, okay, you can offset tier 1 with whatever resource, go ahead, and we will allow you to bring that resource on. So it's really a byproduct. It was never meant to disincent resources. We just never envisioned customers bringing resources when they didn't have any growth. But that's the world we're living in, and customers have very much, communities have a lot more maybe green initiatives that, we want this resource for whatever reason, or we have an opportunity like your hydro that, this is a great opportunity. And we actually had the decision to allow that because we know it is a 3 megawatt. So, okay, yeah, we'll allow you to bring that on. You're right. It does offset tier 1, but that's how we could get around it, to allow you to bring this resource on, given the contract terms.
And in our instance with this particular project, isn't there a stipulation as well? When you bring on resources, you have to dedicate it to the system or something like that? I can't remember what that rule is and where it applies for sure. When you bring on a new resource, you have to dedicate it, don't you? In some way, shape or form?
Yes and no. Depends on what you're doing with this. You want to use it to serve load as a load.
That's our
Right, because
intent
we
is
have
to
some
serve
customers that take resource and they want to go market, whatever. But
Right. Yeah.
So and I can see it there too. It's like, okay, if we've developed, I can see one reason why BPA would say we're going to lower your high water mark.
If you
because
sell the power.
bingo.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we developed our own new power. We're going to take this tier 1 power that we've gotten from BPA. We're going to sell it to somebody else. But that
can't do that.
yeah, we're not talking about that. I think my question relates back to, okay, we have a situation, we're looking at a 3 megawatt project. We're also looking at 3 megawatts of new demand coming on with a electrified ferry.
Right.
And I think the bigger issue, again, as Joel said it, in Washington State, we've got a legislative mandate to go carbon free. We also have a legislative mandate to electrify a lot of things. And I think everybody is looking at this saying, okay, yeah, there may still be some utilities that have flat or no load growth, and those policymakers at those utilities may see the future skeptically as not changing. I think the rest of us are going, we're really worried about where's this new energy going to come from. And yes, Bonneville can say, well, we'll always go out in the market and we'll buy the energy for you. And now it's, 6 some cents, which still sounds fairly affordable to me compared to some of these other costs I'm hearing. But I think the public, a lot of the public here are like, if we can develop energy sources closer to where it's going to be used, we're also hearing about transmission constraints the BPA has. We've heard lots of discussions about how hard it is to build new transmission, and there's really no changes on the horizon that suddenly it's going to get easier. Why wouldn't BPA, even though there's being tugged in different directions by different utilities with different visions. Why wouldn't BPA relax in the future rules, some of those rules about allowing more local generation, because I think we're going to need it. And I was listening to a Northwest Power and Conservation Council meeting where the representative from Idaho, and I think Tim Johnson was the BPA person there. He literally asked this question. He said, isn't it the case that you've got a rule that is discouraging local generation?
Yeah.
And Tim just dodged it. He didn't answer the question. And to me, it's the elephant in the middle of the room that we're going to need more power. BPA is pulled in different directions. We're transmission constrained. Why wouldn't we allow, and is that part of the discussion, or
It
what
very,
extent is
very
it?
much is. And yeah, it's true. It's very much true that the next contract in the concept paper we put out, we heard very clearly from customers, we want more flexibility with bringing on resources. And so that SNEER exception I was talking about, less than 1 megawatt, we've actually raised that, or proposed, excuse me, I already used
Right. It's
proposed.
all proposals at this
Yeah,
point.
proposed to raise that to, up to 5 megawatts. You can
Okay.
just bring on small, resources in your service territory. And anything, honestly, less than a megawatt under the proposal was, you don't even have to tell us, because on the current contract, anything over 200 kW, you got to let us know about.
Right.
And the proposal in the next contract is less than 1 megawatt, fine. And you can get up to 5 meg. So there's 3 megawatts in the next contract. If that proposal carries through, it would just be a SNEER at that point. It would just offset your load. So
Okay.
I think we have heard customers say that we're trying to be more flexible. Transmission, I'm trying to throw them under the bus, but they have a lot more stringent requirements.
just
When you
hard.
start bringing resources that may touch the grid, may not, so.
Yeah, find somebody who wants new transmission lines in their neighborhood. I mean, it's like, it's not their fault that we're dealing with the American public, and we want
Yeah,
what we
nobody
want,
wants to see
but we
a
don't want to see
transmission
it.
line.
We want power, but we don't want to see it.
Exactly. So, we have heard customers that sentiment of, resource flexibility, and I think the concept or the draft policy you'll see in July will at least acknowledge it.
Okay.
And I don't know how descriptive it will be. It is really higher level policy. But,
Right.
in that contract writing phase, which is the follow on, that will be a big discussion.
Okay, well, that's helpful in that, let's say that hypothetical 5 megawatt number. If you're not doing more than 5 megawatts, it would be called
Well, it's 5 in aggregate. So
5
if
in
it- yeah,
aggregate.
So if you had a 3 and a 2, that would be the 5.
Okay, and would that be per 2 rate year period,
That'd be
or would
for-
that be for the whole 20-year?
As
Contract.
proposed, it was for the contract.
Okay. All right. That was a big question of mine. That was.
I'm sorry, what does that mean for the contract? Does it mean
Like,
annual
Year
or just
contract.
Yeah, for the duration.
for the 20 years? So it's 5.
Right,
So-
so if you had 5 1 megawatt resources, or, just over 1 megawatt resources, that essentially you could just bring on and they could offset tier 1 load as you see fit if you didn't have a
Got it.
buffer. Yeah,
For
And- and-
for a utility like us, 5 megawatts, that's a lot,
a lot of generation.
but for Snohomish PUD or City of Seattle or something, that's not that much.
No, yeah, so you're right. Again, talk about the breadth of customers. We have 0.5 megawatt customers and we have 700, whatever. And, this one seemed to cater to a lot of folks who were smaller, who weren't growing as much. They still wanted to do resource development. And we didn't want to be a barrier to that. So we're trying to find ways to work within the contract. where
Okay.
we can make that happen.
Well, and I guess it's helpful also to hear how BPA policy has evolved over time and will probably continue to evolve. And again, you're working with multiple different states. Idaho and Montana have very different visions for their energy future than Oregon and Washington. And we're going to just kind of keep working within this as we go along. What happens if halfway through the 20-year contract, things are really different? This little graph you've got where you're projecting lower power for lower high water mark for 2022, 2023. Presumably that's because of what, we thought the snow conditions would be or whatever.
Yeah.
What happens if all of a sudden we've got a declining line and 10 years into this thing, we've got a lot less power and we're paying a lot more for power? is there possibilities? And I know that we've talked, I think part of the discussions was opening up the contracts if things really changed. Where are the discussions at now for that sort of thing?
Off-ramps, I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
Any off-ramps.
I know BPA didn't want to do off ramps, but I'm just kind of thinking, what happens if things really change?
What slide are you guys talking about so I can report it?
Well, the slide I'm looking at is just slide 6, which you have up there. I'm just saying, what happens if, 10 years down the road, all of a sudden, the tier 1
Projections.
keeps going down significantly.
Yeah, well, I mean, what we've heard from customers is they don't like that black line moving around. So they want a flat black line. So that might, ease some of that concern if that's the way we go. Okay, we'll just make the system X amount. We won't let it go every rate period up and down so customers can see whether or not on a 15-year basis, it looks like I'm gonna have above high watermark load in year 7. I better plan for that. So under this line, you see, it's hard to do because I don't know what the black line's gonna do.
Right.
So we're trying to, okay, well, if we make that black line flat, you'll know, and we know your forecast. So as good as your forecast is, that should be an indicator if you want to do resource development. As far as off ramps, the problem or difficulty there, I guess, is if Bonneville is responsible for serving your load, right? And we see that load on the horizon and go, oh, wow, we got a lot of load coming out. We need to go out and do some resource acquisition. So if we get, maybe it's a build, maybe we want to build something, I don't know, whatever it would be. That takes time, it takes money.
Mhm.
And if customers have the ability to off ramp, those are stranded costs now that whoever's left has to pay for. And
Right.
so that's the rub, right? Like,
Right.
we don't want to be inflexible, but if we're going to make these long-term decisions, which resource development is definitely a long-term decision, we need some certainty that we can recover those costs. So that's,
Kevin, excuse me, Kevin, did you have a hard stop at noon?
We can continue on.
I think we're really covering most of my questions, but I guess, so it's draft, but your understanding is the draft proposal wouldn't have the high water mark adjusting every 2 years. It would stay steady for 20 years. I mean, that's
what customers advocated.
what
on some
customers have
level, yeah.
advocated. We don't know what the
Correct.
concept paper will
Yeah.
say because it hasn't come out yet. You're not authorized to
Yeah.
say about what's in there, but one idea is that it could stay flat for 20
Fix
years.
the system.
Different views
Okay.
on what the allocation should be, but it's the size of the system that's gonna somewhat dictate it. And you're talking about augmentation, which is to add or bring in new resources.
Yes.
That's what'll have to happen down the road if these numbers don't play out.
Correct. Or wherever we set that, if you set that black bar at a certain spot, you'll know in advance on if you need to go and do some resource development.
Right.
And we'll know from customers who say, no, I want to take that responsibility. So we'll know how much, and that again is another long-term, a lot of this stuff is long-term decisions.
20-year contract, 10 years from now, a small modular nuclear reactor could pick up some of those mega ones.
You never, yeah, there's hydrogen stuff, there's small module, there's a lot of new technology. Batteries may be the game changer. It's tough. And we're trying to create a contract that not only accommodates all that, but also the markets are out there, are changing, EIM, KISO, SPP markets plus.
Mhm.
So we don't even know what the structure of trading power is going to look
Right.
like. And we're trying to get these contracts in place in the next couple of years that can be flexible enough when those things are done that we can,
Right.
slide right in and the contract language still holds.
Odds are things won't be the same.
Yeah, to answer
So
your
what
question,
I-
in 10 years, man, that's,
We'll have.
Who
more-
knows?
who knows what 10 years looks like.
Could you talk a little bit? One of the things that's been really interesting is every once in a while, there'll be a discussion about, and prices actually went negative during this period of time. And it'll be somebody from BPA talking about how prices went negative, da, 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 da. And I think about that and I think about, okay, prices went negative. What does that mean? Well, we've got a lot of excess power. We're actually having to pay folks to take it. Doesn't that say that there's a demand there for storage? As you just said, that when you go to negative pricing, it's sending a market signal that, boy, it'd be really nice to have more storage right now because those storage facilities could be acquiring the power at that time and selling it back. Isn't that what a negative price is
Analysis is
saying?
gonna be tricky on that,
Yeah,
because you can always stop generating at some of the facilities.
and that's how Bonneville we don't pay negative prices. We don't pay people to take our power. We'll either shut down generators in our VA. Or if we have, so we have, or you could have loads that we say, okay, why don't you turn on? Because we need to dump this load, turn on your process, whatever it is. And so we can at least sink some of that load, excess generation, rather than just spilling it. Because we have, limits on how much we can spill for fish footprints and things like that. So we actually did have negative pricing a couple weeks ago. And they're, in the real time market. So it's not like these are long duration events, but it's just, we had the heat goes, we're very much dependent on the hydro system and the snow melt. When the weather heats up, we have no control over when the snow melt happens.
And a lot of the projects are run of the river projects where it's got to go
There's so
through.
much capability, but like I said, you have to keep flows going. We have other considerations, fish, other things that we have to keep the rivers moving. And we want to run them through generators, water through generators so we can sell it. But, we have to, so it's just a tough managing.
But am I
our
wrong?
system.
Isn't a negative price? So isn't that a market signal that, boy, if somebody had storage, that's an opportunity for them?
It is, but storage.
It also curtails. I mean, it ends up BPA has to curtail some of their wind customers. So, I mean, there's a real.
Like I said, we will shut down the generators before we'll pay negative price. But if someone could store it, I guess, for a short duration, storage right now is really.
You're hoping that the market can pick it up and after that short duration,
Yeah.
otherwise you've been made a big investment in storage and stored it for nothing except an expense.
Right, and if you're storing power at a negative, I don't know how quickly the price will rebound for you to sell that power at a, whatever your marginal cost is to make your battery fees, so you'd have those considerations. If the math worked out, I suppose it could work.
You're getting into extended markets and day ahead markets and things like that. It gets a little convoluted.
Which I don't really,
Yeah.
know what.
You mentioned one thing too, since we're talking about the fish and the water flows and all that, you mentioned you're limited on the spill, and that's for the dissolved gases, correct? And that's the main reason why the restriction on spill is you can't generate so much gases in the water that it kills the young fish, correct? Is that what
Yep.
you're referring to?
Yep.
Okay.
Wow, we covered a lot of ground.
Well, it was.
Yes, we have.
Appreciate your flexibility in kind of jumping around and answering questions, because there's a lot of terminology in this. It's funny how you explained the terminology even changes. I don't think I had ever heard somebody explain how these different contract periods have different names, and that the one looking forward is provider of choice, and the last one was regional dialogue. I heard these terms over and over again. I didn't get that they were associated
A
with
lot
a
of people
specific
convolute too. So
time
that's where
period.
It gets confusing.
Yeah. they're
instead of just
separate.
saying rate contract,
Our current-
2008 to 2028, instead of calling it that, you come up with a name, which,
Our current contract versus the proposed new contract.
Right. Yeah.
So
Jump in just real quick. This was excellent. Is there any chance, Marcus, in a future meeting sometime this summer, you can come down and do basically the same thing?
once the provider of choice concept paper, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Is out.
Yep.
I mean, that would be really nice to,
kind of-
now that you can talk more about, okay, we have a
This is what
proposal
Yep.
out there. What does it mean?
And the record of decision will be at the end of the year. Is that the current schedule or is it expected later?
It's expected in January. So there will be in July, we release the policy paper, and we'll have a workshop also to,
Tweak it.
for customers to say, walk through with them. This is what we put in here. And then there's a 60-day comment period. And, customers can, because customers have been giving us written feedback, but it wasn't a formal response. So we didn't have to actually respond to every comment. If it's in the ROD or if it's part of the ROD, we will have to respond. So that's why after 60 days, we're going to need another 6 to respond to everybody's comments that they made, which is why it puts us, towards the end of the calendar year before we get the final. And something may come up during that comment period that we're like, yeah, we need to relook at that and change, maybe have another workshop or something to talk specifically about one issue. I just don't know where it'll go.
I think
so, Marcus, can we anticipate over the next 6 to 8 months some future visits from you?
If you can promise weather like this, I'll be here.
All right, we promise.
to me, the part that's relevant is oftentimes we'll be budgeting, we'll have a consultant come in and help us do a cost of service study and talk about rates. And we're in kind of a unique place. We're putting in new meters now that have more capabilities than our old meters. I think we have the potential of doing time of use rates in the future. The cost of BPA power is only, one factor in our budgeting, but it's a significant part of the cost. And little things really add up. And to the extent we can understand looking ahead as commissioners, how the BPA rates will affect our costs and how maybe us sending signals to our customers or structuring our rates in such a way, I think the sooner we can understand that, the sooner we can bring in consultants to help us crunch the numbers and figure things out.
Yep.
The sooner we can send signals to our customers about what they can do to help us and be part of the solution.
Yeah.
So
And that was, under the tiered rate methodology, one of the, I mean, it is very complicated. It's very elegant. It does what it was meant to do, but it's hard to understand.
Yeah.
And one thing I think customers like about it is the fact that because we set rates for a 2-year period and you basically have a big customer charge on your bill every month, you actually know 2 years in advance the bulk of what your bill might look, for that 2-year period. There's definitely within month charges that will range. Winter, obviously a little more expensive than summertime. But, for you guys, probably around 80% of your costs are probably for 2 years are known upfront. And then the 20% will vary depending on the water year and the weather. But so that was the idea, just, to give some certainty on
Mhm.
some level. But anyway, and I think, from everything customers have said, they want to carry that forward.
mhm.
And the tiered rate methodology seems to be the framework to do that.
One more quick question, since you're talking about the rate periods. There was discussion about going to a longer rate period of 3 years. Is that still part of discussions, or is it still the plan to stay with 2 years for the near term? I mean, is there anything going on there?
That will be in the, it should be in the paper.
Oh,
Yeah. I will say, it's funny, regional dialogue ends in 2028 and you can see that we're in 24, 25 rate cases just wrapping up. So we've got 3 years left. And so we're trying to figure out now how we're going to manage that 3 years, because we only have 2-year rate periods. Do we go one long rate period, or do we go a 2 and a 1, a 1 and a 2? We're very much in that window of trying to figure out how to handle these last 3 years. And we knew it was going to happen when we made the contract. So where the TRM does recognize this, and it says, we'll decide when we get there. And so we're there. And so we need to decide what we're gonna do with those last 3 years. I know that doesn't answer your question about going forward, but it might be a test case. We might do the 3-year and see how that works. But I think the policy, I better not say. I
You
don't know.
might even have,
So-
the first year of the last, you might have 2 years where 2 years straddles it. One is the end of the contract and one is the new year,
Yeah.
first year of the contract. Who
I know our
knows?
rates folks would hate that.
Hmm.
Because the rate structure changes on it by any stretch in those
Yeah.
contract.
Well, the rate
agreements.
cases are already being challenged at the 2-year marks. I can imagine what
Yeah.
3 years would do.
We used to have-
So we are a bit over what we'd originally allocated for time. So I want to thank you, Marcus, for coming up and visiting with us and sharing information. Look forward to reviewing your slides. And this was very, very helpful, I think, for all of us. So your visit has been very much appreciated.
Thanks, Ken. Appreciate it.
When we get the transmission people in, we'll tell them you didn't throw them under the bus.
Oh, it's recorded. Dang it.
So on that note, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a
Yep.
good day.
Thanks, Mark.